The Federation had always operated under the assumption that the universe followed predictable laws. Physics, mathematics, subspace dynamics, all quantifiable, all rational. But on stardate 50847.3, Deep Space Nine sensors detected something that defied every sensor array, every theoretical framework, every logical explanation the Federation could muster. Captain Benjamin Sisko stood on the ops bridge, watching the readings cascade across the tactical display. "Yellow alert," he commanded, his voice steady despite the spike of adrenaline coursing through his veins. Around him, his senior staff moved with practiced precision, Chief O'Brien at engineering, Dax monitoring the spatial anomaly, Odo at security. The Dominion War had taught them all to expect the unexpected, but this was something else entirely. The anomaly bloomed in subspace like a wound opening in reality itself. It wasn't a wormhole. It wasn't a temporal rift. Chief O'Brien's sensors registered an energy signature that fluctuated between dimensional frequencies, phasing in and out of normal spacetime in patterns no one had ever documented. The readings made Bashir wince from the infirmary as they cascaded across his console. "Captain, we're detecting a massive energy discharge," Dax reported, her joined consciousness accessing centuries of Starfleet knowledge. Even with all her experience, her voice carried uncertainty. "Whatever that is, it's collapsing. Now." The anomaly imploded with a silent fury that rippled across the station's shields. For a moment, nothing but static flooded the sensors. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, leaving behind only a faint residue of chronoton particles and an energy signature that the computers simply labeled as unidentified. "Damage report," Sisko commanded. "The promenade took some electromagnetic interference, but shields held," O'Brien reported. "We're lucky it didn't breach the docking ring." But Odo's voice cut through the relief with sharp concern. "Captain, we have a situation in Cargo Bay 3. Something came through with that anomaly." When Sisko arrived at the cargo bay with a security team, he found Odo standing over an unconscious figure on the deck plating. The man was dressed in black and navy clothing unlike anything in Federation databases, form-fitting, tactical, with an aesthetic that suggested both artistry and lethal purpose. His dark hair fell across his face, and his breathing was shallow but steady. He was humanoid, vaguely Asian in appearance, though no registered species matched his physiological markers. "He materialized here about 90 seconds ago," Odo explained, his constable's eye already cataloging details. "No hostile action yet, but he's armed." He gestured to the strange curved blade at the figure's side. "And his vital signs are unusual. Heart rate elevated, some kind of energy residue coating his skin that our tricorders can't quite classify." Bashir arrived moments later, his medical scanner already active. "Fascinating," he murmured, studying the readouts. "His physiology is, well, I'm not entirely sure what it is. There's some kind of bioluminescent energy network running through his nervous system. Not quite telepathic in the way Vulcans are, but similar. The energy appears to be generated internally." "Can you stabilize him?" Sisko asked. "Already done. Whatever brought him here, his body is adapting. The readings are normalizing as we speak." Bashir paused, frowning at his scanner. "But there's something else. There are cells in his body that I can only describe as active. It's like his entire physiology is engaged in some kind of constant internal martial discipline. I've never seen anything like it." The man's eyes opened suddenly. His gaze was dark, penetrating, and immediately hostile. He pushed himself backward with speed that defied his apparent weakness, his hand finding the hilt of his blade in one fluid motion. The security officers moved to restrain him, but Sisko raised a hand. "Stand down," he ordered. Then, speaking in a calm, measured tone, "You're safe. We found you unconscious. My name is Captain Benjamin Sisko. This is Deep Space Nine, a Federation station. Can you understand me?" The man's dark eyes, an unusual shade that seemed almost purple in the station's lighting, tracked each person in the room methodically. His hand remained on his weapon. He said nothing, but his breathing remained controlled, deliberate. The tension in the room crystallized. "He doesn't speak Federation standard," Dax observed from where she'd followed Sisko in. Her joined symbiont's memories, however, stirred something. That clothing, that fighting stance, there's something almost familiar about it, but from no culture I've encountered in over 300 years. The man's eyes flicked to Dax, then back to Sisko. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and absolutely foreign. Syllables that fell into a cadence none of them recognized. The universal translator in their combadge's word, struggling to process the language, but failing. "Welcome to Deep Space Nine," Sisko said, maintaining his diplomatic composure despite the growing realization that they had just received something unprecedented. "You're aboard a Starfleet station. If you can understand me, I need you to lower your weapon. We can help you." The man's jaw tightened. His chakra, the energy that defined his entire existence, felt wrong, dampened, like trying to move through water made of lead. Every technique, every jutsu he'd ever learned felt sluggish, resistant, as though the very laws of physics had shifted beneath his feet. His Sharingan, the symbol of his power and heritage, activated instinctively, the three tomos spinning in the familiar crimson pattern. His eyes scanned the room with enhanced perception, reading the bioelectric patterns of every person present. They were strong. Different. But nothing like what he'd known. Slowly, deliberately, he released his grip on his blade. "My name is Sasuke Uchiha," he said in Federation Standard, the universal translator crackling to life. His accent was sharp, precise, each word a controlled assertion of will. "I don't know where this is. But if you're warriors, then we have much to discuss about the threats you face." Sisko exchanged a glance with Dax. Deep Space Nine had faced Dominion invasion fleets, temporal anomalies, and the manifestations of ancient prophecies. But somehow, he suspected that this quiet, black-haired warrior with eyes that seemed to see through walls would prove to be something far more complicated than any of them anticipated. "Welcome aboard, Sasuke Uchiha," Sisko said carefully. "Let's start with who you are. And what that energy signature was that brought you here." Behind his eyes, Sasuke's mind raced through calculations, strategic assessments, and the grim realization that his entire journey, his quest for power, for understanding, for transcendence, had just been irrevocably altered by a force he didn't understand. He had crashed into a universe that operated on principles he didn't comprehend. And for the first time in his life, his ultimate power felt inadequate to the challenge. The holding cell was transparent aluminum, a modern Federation design meant to contain dangerous individuals while allowing observation. Sasuke stood motionless in the center of the small space, his eyes closed, his breathing measured and deliberate. Around him, the faint shimmer of a containment field created a subtle barrier that his senses could feel but not penetrate. It was infuriating, this weakness, this dampening of his chakra that made him feel like a child learning to walk again. Captain Sisko observed him from the corridor outside, accompanied by Counselor Deanna Troi. The Betazoid's empathic abilities made her invaluable in first-contact situations, especially with beings whose emotional landscape remained unmapped. She stood quietly for a long moment, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. "He's not what he appears," Troi said finally. "There's immense discipline beneath the surface, a warrior's focus. But there's also something else. Hunger. Not for food, but for power, I think. And beneath that, something darker. Isolation. He's been alone for a very long time. Can he understand us?" Sisko asked. "I'm not sensing hostile intent toward the station, if that's what concerns you. But his emotional barriers are formidable. It's like trying to read a wall." Troi paused. "He's not Dominion. That much I'm certain of. Whatever he is, he's not from this universe. Over the next 6 hours, Bashir ran every medical scan available in Deep Space Nine's infirmary. The results were simultaneously fascinating and deeply troubling. Sasuke's physiology operated on principles that violated several Federation medical assumptions. The energy network running through his nervous system, which he called chakra, wasn't electrical, not entirely. It was something more fundamental, a bio-spiritual force that seemed to exist at the intersection of multiple quantum states simultaneously. His cells are regenerating at approximately 3 times the normal human rate. Bashir explained to the senior staff in the briefing room. Chief O'Brien, Dax, Odo, and Sisko listened intently. Coupled with his physical conditioning, he's essentially a peak human specimen enhanced by something we don't have a framework for understanding. If he decided to be violent, restraint might be difficult. Can you suppress his abilities? Sisko asked. The containment field is doing that to some degree. But I'm hesitant to rely on it long term. Whatever suppresses his chakra also appears to cause him physical distress. His neural activity spikes when the field is active. Another 6 hours at this intensity, and I'd be concerned about permanent neurological damage. Odo leaned forward. So we either release him or we risk harming him. Not release him unsupervised, Bashir clarified. But yes, extended containment could be counterproductive. Sisko made a decision. Release him to quarters under guard. Full security monitoring. And schedule Counselor Troy for an interview. If we're going to understand what he's doing here, we need to establish some form of communication. Sasuke's quarters were sparse, a modest guest room with viewport overlooking the Denorio's wormhole. He stood at the window for over an hour, watching the massive structure hang in space like a wound in reality itself. The wormhole's energy signature fascinated him. It was structured, contained, understood. So unlike the chaotic rupture that had torn him from his world. When Counselor Troy entered, she came alone, per Sasuke's explicit demand. Odo's security officers remained just outside, visible but distant. I am Deanna Troy, she began, settling into one of the chairs. I'm a counselor, someone who helps people process difficult emotions and situations. I imagine arriving in an unknown place, surrounded by people you don't understand, would be challenging. Sasuke turned from the viewport. His Sharingan was dormant now, his eyes returned to their natural dark state. I need to understand this universe's power structures, he said bluntly. You call yourself Starfleet. Who threatens you? Who are your strongest enemies? Troy smiled slightly. Directness. That matched what she'd sensed about him. That's complicated. We have several adversaries. The Dominion, a shape-shifting species from another quadrant, has been at war with the Federation for 3 years now. We've also had conflicts with the Klingon Empire, the Romulan Star Empire, the Cardassian Union. Even the Borg. A cybernetic collective that assimilates biological beings into their hive mind. Rankings, Sasuke demanded. From strongest to weakest. Power isn't always about physical capability, Troy replied carefully. The Borg collective might be the most militarily formidable, but the Dominion's strategic intelligence makes them more immediately dangerous. The Klingon are warriors like yourself, honorable in their own way. The Romulans are cunning. The Cardassians are resource-focused. Sasuke absorbed this information with the focused intensity of a military strategist. And the Federation? Where do you rank? We're explorers first, warriors second. We value diplomatic solutions and scientific advancement. We have strong principles. The Prime Directive prevents us from interfering in pre-warp civilizations, for instance. And we have the ability to cooperate with allies in ways that give us strategic advantage. Troy paused. You're wondering whether you should ally with us or against us. Sasuke's gaze was steady. I'm wondering whether you're capable of surviving what's coming. I'm wondering whether your principles will be a strength or a fatal weakness. What are your principles, Sasuke? Troy asked. For a moment, something flickered across his face, a shadow of pain, of conflict, of a journey that had cost him more than any battle. I pursue strength. Power. Understanding. The ability to protect what matters and eliminate what threatens it. He paused. I was alone in that pursuit for a long time. Recently, I began to understand that absolute isolation was also absolute weakness. And now you're here, Troy observed. In a universe where your power is diminished. My chakra is being suppressed by your subspace radiation. It's an incompatibility issue. His tone was matter-of-fact, analytical. But I'm already adapting. Given time, I will return to full capacity. Perhaps even exceed it, once I understand how your universe's energy structures operate. Troy felt a chill. Not from hostility, Sasuke wasn't threatening her. But from the absolute certainty in his voice. This was a man who achieved what he determined to achieve. The only question was whether the Federation would be his ally or his obstacle. Captain Sisko would like to negotiate terms for your stay on Deep Space Nine, Troy said. We need to understand what happened to you, where you came from, and what your intentions are. My intentions, Sasuke repeated, are to survive in this universe and understand its power dynamics. If your Federation aids that goal, I will cooperate. If your station becomes an obstacle to my progress, I will remove the obstacle. He turned back to the viewport, his profile silhouetted against the wormhole's radiance. Arrange the meeting with your captain. But know this, I am not your prisoner, and I will not be treated as one. Troy stood to leave. Welcome to the Federation, Sasuke Uchiha. I suspect you're going to teach us a great deal about ourselves. Over the next 24 hours, Deep Space Nine systems began detecting anomalies that no one had anticipated. Sasuke's chakra was actively interfacing with the station's subspace field in ways that were starting to cause minor fluctuations in power systems. Chief O'Brien ran diagnostic after diagnostic, puzzled by the readings. It's like his physiology is conducting a conversation with our subspace field, O'Brien explained to Sisko. Not hostile, exactly, but it's definitely affecting our systems. If he's this influential just from being on the station, I can't imagine what happens when he really starts learning how to manipulate the environment. Sisko made a note in his personal log, Day 1 with Sasuke Uchiha complete. We've acquired a being of tremendous power whose full capabilities we don't understand, in a universe he doesn't comprehend, during a war that's consuming everything we value. I have no idea whether this will be the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat Deep Space Nine has ever faced. Possibly both. The real test would come soon enough. Because somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant, Dominion intelligence had already begun receiving reports of an unprecedented energy signature appearing in Federation space. And the Founders didn't tolerate anomalies. They eliminated them. Sasuke sat in the center of his quarters, legs crossed in a meditation stance that would have been familiar to any shinobi from the Hidden Leaf Village. His eyes were closed, his breathing synchronized to the rhythm of Deep Space Nine's power core, a synchronization he discovered almost by accident during his first night on the station. The chakra-dampening effect from the station's subspace field remained, but it was no longer a complete suppression. Instead, it had become a puzzle to solve, a resistance to overcome. He extended his awareness outward, his Rinnegan, even dormant, allowing him to sense the energetic patterns flowing through the station's infrastructure. What he found was both fascinating and deeply troubling. The station operated on principles fundamentally different from anything he'd encountered. Chakra manipulation relied on understanding the flow of spiritual and physical energy through living systems. But this universe's technology functioned on different mechanics entirely, subspace fields, quantum fluctuations, matter-antimatter reactions. It was as though two completely different languages for describing reality had suddenly been forced to coexist. His first attempt to channel his chakra through a standard Sharingan genjutsu had been a failure. The illusion had formed correctly in his mind, but when he tried to project it outward, it had scattered against the station's quantum field like light refracting through a prism. The neural patterns he tried to influence simply didn't respond to chakra manipulation. The Federation citizens' minds operated on different electrical and chemical substrates, making his most refined techniques useless. The humiliation of that moment still burned. A notification chimed on the comm system. "Uchiha, this is Chief O'Brien. Captain wants to see you in ops. We've got a situation developing." Sasuke opened his eyes. Through the viewport, he could see the wormhole. And beyond it, something new. A ripple in subspace, the telltale signature of multiple starships decloaking. When Sasuke arrived in ops, the bridge was already in controlled chaos. Multiple red alert indicators pulsed across the tactical displays, and Captain Sisko's jaw was set with the grim determination Sasuke had come to recognize as his command demeanor. "For Dominion warships," Dax announced, her voice steady despite the tactical nightmare displayed before them. "Jem'Hadar attack fighters inbound. 30 seconds to weapons range. Yellow alert. All hands to battle stations," Sisko commanded. Then, noticing Sasuke, "Mr. Uchiha. I'm glad you're here. We need to understand something about your abilities. Can you sense danger? Can you predict attack patterns?" Sasuke's Sharingan activated instantly, the three-tomo pattern spinning crimson in the station's light. His enhanced perception allowed him to process visual information at extraordinary speeds. Tracking the fighter trajectories, calculating approach vectors, analyzing the Jem'Hadar's tactical doctrine in the few seconds before engagement. "They're organized," he said, his voice cutting through the bridge noise like a blade. "Disciplined. Similar to military structures I've encountered before. They prioritize coordinated strikes over individual valor. Their formation suggests they're attempting to overwhelm your defensive grid with concentrated fire on your most critical systems." He pointed at the tactical display. "That section of the station, your shield generators. They'll hit there first. Chief, reinforce shields around the power core." Sisko barked. The station's shields flared to life as the Dominion fighters opened fire. The impacts rocked the station, and alarms wailed through ops. But the reinforced shields held, dispersing the concentrated energy across a wider area. Sasuke watched the exchange with predatory focus. The Jem'Hadar were impressive. Faster than he'd anticipated, with weapons systems that operated at lethal efficiency. But they were also predictable. They followed standard military doctrine, executing formations and tactics that could be anticipated once you understood their underlying philosophy. It was the rigidity of organized warfare, powerful in its discipline, but vulnerable to improvisation. "They're pulling back," Dax reported. "Regrouping at a distance." Running a sensor sweep, Chief O'Brien called out. "Captain, they're trying to hack our communications systems. And they're broadcasting on multiple frequencies. It looks like a hailing attempt." "Open a channel," Sisko commanded. The view screen flickered, and a figure materialized, a Jem'Hadar soldier, his white skin and solid black eyes giving him an appearance that was simultaneously humanoid and utterly alien. Behind him stood a woman whose delicate features and perfect composure marked her as a Vorta administrator. "I am Vorta Kellam," the woman said, her voice cultured and precise. "We represent the Dominion. We have detected an energy signature on your station that belongs to neither the Alpha nor Gamma Quadrant. We will retrieve this asset immediately, or we will destroy your station and retrieve it from the wreckage. You have 30 seconds to comply." Sisko's face remained impassive. "This is Captain Benjamin Sisko of the Federation Starfleet. We don't surrender our people." "He is not your people," Kellam interrupted. "He is an anomaly from a reality outside our taxonomy. Surrender him, or cease to exist. The channel closed. Sisko turned to Sasuke. They want you. I assume you have some idea why. My chakra signature, Sasuke said coldly. It's unlike anything in this universe. From a biological perspective, I'm a unique specimen. They're interested in understanding it. Possibly reproducing it. He paused, his expression hardening. They're also interested in acquiring a warrior who might exceed their normal parameters. Will you fight them? Sisko asked bluntly. Sasuke's Sharingan spun faster, the tomo blurring with increased rotation. I will fight anyone who threatens my survival. The question is whether your station is capable of mounting a credible defense, or whether my presence here will result in its destruction. The Borg are our greatest threat, Dax said quietly. The Dominion is formidable, but they're not invincible. We've fought them to stalemate before. Then we'll prepare for extended engagement, Sisko decided. He turned to tactical. All hands, red alert. Lock weapons on those Dominion ships. Charge the main phaser array. Chief, I need you to coordinate with our allies. Contact the Klingon Defense Force. Tell them we have a situation at Deep Space Nine that requires immediate reinforcement. As Sisko continued issuing orders, Sasuke moved to the tactical display and began analyzing the spatial geometry. His chakra, despite its dampening, allowed him to perceive energy flows in ways that Federation sensors couldn't. He could see the way the station's shield generators resonated with subspace, could sense the frequency at which the Dominion weapons operated. Your defensive architecture is inefficient, he said, pointing at the schematic. If you redistribute your shield generators along this pattern, you increase redundancy by approximately 20%. And if you time your phaser bursts to coincide with their weapons' discharge cycles, you can achieve greater penetration through their shields. Sisko looked at the Uchiha warrior with new appreciation. This wasn't just raw power. This was tactical genius, strategic thinking, the mind of a warrior refined through countless battles. Implement those modifications, Sisko ordered. And Sasuke, thank you. You've just earned yourself a spot on this station that goes beyond prisoner status. Over the next 6 hours, the battle raged. The Dominion pressed their assault relentlessly, but the Federation defenders, bolstered by Sasuke's tactical input and enhanced Sharingan perception, held their ground. When Klingon warbuds dropped out of warp and added their firepower to the defense, the Dominion commander made the tactical decision to retreat. As the enemy ships warped away, Sisko allowed himself a moment of relief. Then he turned to Sasuke, whose Sharingan was still active, tracking the retreating vessels. You just saved Deep Space Nine, Sisko said. Sasuke's response was characteristically blunt, I saved myself. But in doing so, I have demonstrated that my presence creates strategic value. That makes me an asset worth defending rather than surrendering. He deactivated his Sharingan. However, I've also discovered something troubling. My chakra is becoming increasingly incompatible with this universe's subspace field. The battle exacerbated the problem. If this continues, I may not retain full capability for long. You need to help me understand how to properly recalibrate my energy systems to this reality, or I become useless to you. Sisko exchanged a glance with Bashir, who just arrived on the bridge. The doctor's expression mirrored his own growing concern. They had a warrior of unprecedented power in their corner, but that power was slowly degrading. The clock was ticking, and none of them knew what Sasuke Uchiha would do if he lost the strength that defined his entire existence. Dr. Bashir's laboratory had become an impromptu research facility dedicated entirely to understanding Sasuke's physiology. Holographic displays floated in three-dimensional space around the Uchiha warrior, each one showing a different aspect of his chakra network, the energy pathways running through his nervous system, the unique quantum signatures of his Rinnegan, the way his cells regenerated at accelerated rates. Sasuke sat motionless on the examination table, allowing the medical scans to continue while his mind worked through the crisis unfolding within his own body. The degradation is accelerating, Bashir said, his usually optimistic demeanor replaced with clinical concern. Over the past 8 hours, your chakra output has decreased by approximately 15%. At this rate, you'll be operating at 60% capacity within 48 hours, and potentially non-functional within a week. The cause? Sasuke asked, though he already knew the answer. His own enhanced perception had been tracking the deterioration since the battle with the Dominion forces. Your chakra exists in a state of quantum superposition, it's simultaneously operating across multiple dimensional frequencies, Bashir explained, pulling up a holographic model of Sasuke's neural pathways. In your native universe, those frequencies are naturally harmonic. Here, they're in constant conflict with our subspace field. It's like trying to maintain a radio signal when someone's constantly jamming the frequency. The energy eventually dissipates. Dax entered the laboratory, carrying a PADD filled with historical data. Her joined symbiont's knowledge had proven invaluable in the past day, centuries of accumulated memories giving her perspective that most Federation officers lacked. I found something in the archives, Dax said, pulling up a series of files. Ancient Bajoran texts describe energy beings that existed across multiple dimensional planes simultaneously. The descriptions are vague, but they mention that such beings required a specific type of environmental anchor to maintain coherence in our universe. A resonance pattern that matched their fundamental frequency. You're suggesting we create an artificial anchor for his chakra, Bashir said, understanding immediately. A subspace field tuned specifically to his energy signature. It's theoretically possible, Dax agreed. But it would require precise calibration. One misstep, and we could destabilize him completely. Sasuke's eyes opened. He'd been listening intently, analyzing the scientific framework they were proposing against his own understanding of chakra mechanics. The concepts were different. Federation science used terminology and mathematical frameworks that had no equivalent in the Shinobi world. But the underlying principle was sound. His chakra needed to be stabilized within this universe's parameters. How long to implement this anchor? He asked. At minimum, 72 hours, Bashir said. We need to run simulations, calibrate the field down to the quantum level, test it with minimal power before scaling up. And that's assuming no complications arise. We don't have 72 hours, a new voice said from the doorway. Colonel Kira Nerys stood in the entrance, her expression grave. We've received intelligence reports from our Romulan contacts. The Dominion is mobilizing a full assault fleet. Not just a tactical incursion, a proper invasion force. They're coming for Sasuke, and they're bringing everything they have. Sasuke stood in one fluid motion, his weakened chakra still allowing him speed and grace that defied normal human capability. How much time? Best estimate? 36 hours before they're in weapons range. The room fell silent. 36 hours. Bashir needed 72 to stabilize his chakra. The mathematics were brutally clear, they wouldn't have time. Then we accelerate the timeline, Sisko said, entering the laboratory with his are vague, but they mentioned that such beings required a specific type of environmental anchor to maintain coherence in our universe. A resonance pattern that matched their fundamental frequency. You're suggesting we create an artificial anchor for his chakra, Bashir said, understanding immediately. A subspace field tuned specifically to his energy signature. It's theoretically possible, Dax agreed. But it would require precise calibration. One misstep, and we could destabilize him completely. Sasuke's eyes opened. He'd been listening intently, analyzing the scientific framework they were proposing against his own understanding of chakra mechanics. The concepts were different. Federation science used terminology and mathematical frameworks that had no equivalent in the Shinobi world. But the underlying principle was sound. His chakra needed to be stabilized within this universe's parameters. How long to implement this anchor? He asked. At minimum, 72 hours, Bashir said. We need to run simulations, calibrate the field down to the quantum level, test it with minimal power before scaling up. And that's assuming no complications arise. We don't have 72 hours, a new voice said from the doorway. Colonel Kira Nerys stood in the entrance, her expression grave. We've received intelligence reports from our Romulan contacts. The Dominion is mobilizing a full assault fleet. Not just a tactical incursion, a proper invasion force. They're coming for Sasuke, and they're bringing everything they have. Sasuke stood in one fluid motion, his weakened chakra still allowing him speed and grace that defied normal human capability. How much time? Best estimate? 36 hours before they're in weapons range. The room fell silent. 36 hours. Bashir needed 72 to stabilize his chakra. The mathematics were brutally clear, they wouldn't have time. Then we accelerate the timeline, Sisko said, entering the laboratory with his characteristic command presence. He'd been monitoring the conversation from Ops. Chief O'Brien is already working with Bashir to modify the station's subspace generators. We'll have the anchor field online within 36 hours, even if we can't fully test it. Sasuke, how much risk are you willing to accept? Sasuke's response was immediate. Complete destabilization is preferable to capture by the Dominion. They would dissect my physiology, attempt to replicate my abilities in their Jem'Hadar soldiers. If successful, they would become exponentially more dangerous. That outcome is unacceptable. Then we're committed, Sisko said. He turned to address the entire group. We have 36 hours to save a man we met 2 days ago from an enemy that outnumbers us and outguns us. Standard procedure would be to surrender him and negotiate. But I'm not interested in standard procedure. Chief O'Brien, I want those subspace modifications prioritized above all else. Dax, coordinate with station intelligence and our Klingon allies. Colonel Kira, prepare our fighter squadrons for combat engagement. And Bashir, do whatever you need to do to keep Sasuke functional during this window. As people dispersed to their stations, Sasuke remained motionless in the center of the laboratory. Sisko paused at the doorway, looking back at the warrior whose presence had already begun reshaping Deep Space Nine's operational parameters. Why are you doing this? Sasuke asked. You barely know me. I could be a threat to your Federation. Sisko considered the question carefully. Because in my experience, the greatest threats often come with the greatest opportunities. And because the Dominion doesn't get to dictate who lives and who dies on my station. He paused. You earned your place here, Sasuke. Now we make sure you keep it. The next 30 hours became a blur of controlled urgency. Chief O'Brien worked with a team of engineers around the clock, modifying the station's subspace generators to produce a field specifically calibrated to Sasuke's chakra frequencies. Bashir conducted continuous medical monitoring, tracking the degradation of Sasuke's abilities second by second, attempting to predict exactly how much longer the Uchiha warrior could maintain combat functionality. But it was the tactical situation that consumed most of Deep Space Nine's resources. Kira's fighter squadrons ran endless simulation drills. The Klingon task force coordinated battle plans with Sisko's senior staff. Intelligence reports flooded in from across the region, Dominion troop movements, supply lines, the composition of the invasion fleet. What emerged was a picture of unprecedented military mobilization. The Dominion was throwing resources at this problem that suggested they considered Sasuke a threat of galactic proportions. In his quarters, watching the wormhole through the viewport, Sasuke meditated. His chakra output had dropped to roughly 70% capacity. His Sharingan required longer periods of recovery between activations. His physical reflexes, still superhuman by Federation standards, felt sluggish compared to what he'd always known. It was terrifying in a way that surprised him. Throughout his life, Sasuke had defined himself through power. His abilities had been his identity, his worth, his very reason for existing. The pursuit of strength had driven every decision, every relationship, every aspect of his character. And now, watching that strength diminish in real time, he was forced to confront a question he'd spent years avoiding: who was Sasuke Uchiha without his power? The philosophical crisis was interrupted by the red alert klaxons that suddenly filled the station. Sasuke moved immediately toward the door, his warrior instincts overriding the fatigue his body wanted to claim. Through the viewport, he could see them, the Dominion fleet, emerging from warp space like a predatory armada. Warships, fighters, troop transports. Dozens of vessels arrayed in precise military formation. He was in ops within minutes, his Sharingan already activated despite the energy cost. Through the enhanced perception of his eyes, he could see the tactical disposition of the enemy fleet, could calculate approach vectors and estimate firepower outputs with frightening precision. "They're coming in fast," Chief O'Brien reported. 15 minutes to weapons range. Subspace anchor field is at 87% functionality, Bashir called out. "I'm still running calibration protocols, but we're close." "How close?" Sisko demanded. 3 minutes. Maybe less. 3 minutes. 15 minutes until the Dominion could begin their assault. The mathematics were tight, but workable. If they could activate the anchor field before the battle began in earnest, Sasuke's chakra would stabilize. He would return to operational capacity. And with a warrior of his caliber at full strength defending the station, the defensive math shifted dramatically in their favor. Sasuke moved to the tactical display, his eyes tracking the approaching vessels with predatory focus. "Their formation has a weakness," he said, pointing. "Their left flank is undersupported. If your fighters concentrate fire there, you can create a rupture in their defensive perimeter. Then redirect your capital ships to exploit that breach." "You're asking us to leave sections of the station vulnerable," Dax noted. "I'm asking you to attack with precision rather than defend with caution," Sasuke corrected. "The Dominion expects resistance. What they won't expect is coordinated aggression. Use that surprise to your advantage." Sisko made the decision instantly. "Helm, adjust course. All hands, weapons hot. Tactical, implement Uchiha's suggestions. Let's show the Dominion what Deep Space Nine can do." The first Dominion weapons blast struck the station's shields just as Chief O'Brien's voice came through the comm: "Subspace anchor field is online." A wave of energy flowed through the station's infrastructure, and Sasuke felt it immediately, his chakra responding, stabilizing, recalibrating to the new subspace frequencies. The dampening sensation that had haunted him for nearly 3 days vanished. His Sharingan burned brighter, the 3 tomos spinning with renewed intensity. His physical strength surged back, as though a weight had been lifted from his very existence. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Sasuke Uchiha felt whole again. "Captain," he said, his voice carrying a confidence that hadn't been there moments before. "I'm ready to defend this station. Let them come." The battle became a symphony of violence conducted by warriors operating at the edges of their capability. Sasuke moved through Deep Space Nine's corridors with purpose, his restored chakra flowing through his pathways like electricity through copper wire. His Sharingan granted him perfect spatial awareness of the station's layout, a 3-dimensional mental map that allowed him to position himself where he was needed most. Colonel Kira's fighter squadrons executed Sasuke's suggested tactics with precision. The coordinated assault on the Dominion fleet's left flank created exactly the rupture he'd predicted. Jem'Hadar pilots, conditioned for direct confrontation rather than strategic adaptation, found themselves suddenly fighting a defensive battle instead of an offensive one. Their disciplined formations fragmented under the assault. But discipline, Sasuke was learning, was both the Jem'Hadar's greatest strength and their critical vulnerability. In ops, he stood beside Captain Sisko, providing real-time tactical analysis while his enhanced perception tracked the battle across multiple engagement zones simultaneously. His Rinnegan, the most powerful of his ocular techniques, was beginning to function again at baseline capacity. The Rinnegan allowed him to perceive chakra signatures, sense gravitational disturbances, and occasionally glimpse alternate realities. In this universe, it operated differently, but the principle remained: he could see patterns others couldn't. Their shield frequency is modulating in a predictable cycle, Sasuke told Sisko, his eyes never leaving the tactical display. Every 37 seconds, there's a 2.3-second window where their defensive grid has a harmonic vulnerability. Time your phaser bursts to coincide with those windows, and you'll achieve approximately 40% greater penetration. Dax implemented the suggestion immediately, and the results were dramatic. Dominion shield generators began failing across the enemy fleet. Warships that had seemed impervious to Federation weapons suddenly became targets of opportunity. "How are you calculating this?" Bashir asked from where he was monitoring Sasuke's vital signs from the medical station. The doctor's readings showed something remarkable: Sasuke's chakra was no longer merely stabilizing. It was evolving, adapting to the subspace field's parameters in real time, creating a hybrid energy system that was simultaneously Naruto physiology and Trek quantum mechanics. "Pattern recognition," Sasuke replied simply. "Everything in combat follows patterns. Tactics, weapon systems, defensive protocols. Once you identify the pattern, you identify the vulnerability. Dominating the battlefield becomes an exercise in mathematical precision." Colonel Kira coordinated the fighter squadrons with the tactical information Sasuke provided. Where his analysis suggested weakness, she concentrated firepower. Where he identified enemy reinforcement vectors, she positioned defensive interceptors. The Dominion fleet found itself fighting a battle where every move was anticipated, every strategy countered before it could fully develop. But Vorda Kellam wasn't leading a standard military operation. The Dominion had sent him with specific orders: acquire Sasuke Uchiha at any cost. That meant the assault continued even as ships were destroyed, even as the tactical situation deteriorated. "They're launching a boarding party," Odo reported from security operations. Jem'Hadar soldiers in assault transports. 30 soldiers, heavily armed, coming through the docking ring. "Station security to Bay 4, Kira ordered. Stop them before they breach the inner perimeter." But Sasuke was already moving. "I'll handle the boarding party," he said, his hand moving to the hilt of his blade, a weapon that had served him through countless battles and dimensional shifts. "Your security personnel are trained for law enforcement. They're not equipped for warriors who have been engineered from conception for combat. You're at full strength?" Sisko asked, a note of concern crossing his features. "Full enough," Sasuke replied. He left ops with the speed of a shinobi in full sprint, his chakra flowing through his legs to propel him faster than any normal human could move. The corridors of Deep Space Nine blurred as he ran, his mind already analyzing the tactical situation ahead. 30 Jem'Hadar soldiers. Elite warriors, but soldiers nonetheless. Operating within the framework of military doctrine and strategic hierarchy. He was a shinobi. He operated in shadows and deception. The Jem'Hadar didn't understand that kind of warfare. When Sasuke reached Docking Bay 4, the Jem'Hadar had already begun their breach. Their disruptor fire tore through the bay's interior, and station security officers scattered for cover. Captain Pirogue, the Jem'Hadar tactical commander, had his soldiers moving with perfect synchronization. Each movement coordinated, each weapon position calculated for maximum firepower density. Then Sasuke arrived. His Sharingan activated with predatory intensity, the crimson eyes tracking every soldier's position, every weapon trajectory, every micro-movement that telegraphed intent. He didn't draw his sword immediately. Instead, he began moving through the Jem'Hadar formation like a ghost, using their own weapon fire as cover, exploiting the dead zones in their tactical perimeter. The first Jem'Hadar soldier saw Sasuke moving and brought his disruptor to bear. The shot was perfectly executed by Federation standards, lethal, accurate, timed for maximum impact. Sasuke was already moving. He pivoted with impossible grace, allowing the disruptor blast to pass millimeters from his body. Simultaneously, he channeled chakra through his hand in a controlled Chidori formation. Not the full, devastating version that could level mountains, but a focused burst of electrical energy that struck the Jem'Hadar in the shoulder. The soldier collapsed, his nervous system temporarily overloaded. Captain Pirogue immediately adapted. "Concentrate fire on the infiltrator," he commanded, his voice remaining perfectly calm despite the tactical surprise. 15 disruptors swung toward Sasuke's last known position. But Sasuke was no longer there. His chakra allowed him to move in ways that defied the Jem'Hadar's reaction times. Each movement was economical, precise, designed to disable rather than kill. He understood that Sisko wanted these soldiers captured, wanted intelligence extracted. More importantly, Sasuke respected the Jem'Hadar's discipline and martial culture enough to grant them a warrior's fate rather than execution. By the time Captain Pirogue realized the tactical situation had inverted, 8 of his soldiers were incapacitated. The remaining 20 pressed their assault with increasing desperation, their disciplined formation breaking apart as they reacted to a threat they couldn't predict. Sasuke drew his blade. The sword moved through the air like dark lightning, each strike calculated to disarm, to disable, to neutralize rather than destroy. But the Jem'Hadar were relentless. They adapted quickly, shifting their tactics to account for his speed and precision. One soldier managed to land a disruptor strike against Sasuke's arm, and he felt the alien weapon's energy burn through his flesh. It hurt. But more importantly, it revealed something crucial: Jem'Hadar disruptors actually were capable of harming him, of bypassing his defensive capabilities through sheer power. The realization shifted the tactical calculus. Sasuke accelerated his assault. His movements became faster, more aggressive, less focused on precision and more focused on overwhelming the remaining soldiers' capacity to respond. His chakra flowed through his muscles, amplifying his strength beyond what any human could achieve. His Sharingan tracked every soldier simultaneously, giving him a complete three-dimensional tactical awareness of the entire engagement. 30 seconds later, the last Jem'Hadar fell. Captain Pirogue remained standing, his weapon still trained on Sasuke. The Jem'Hadar commander's white skin was streaked with blood, and his solid black eyes reflected the Uchiha warrior's imposing figure with what might have been respect. "You fight with honor," Pirogue said quietly. "For a warrior from another reality, you understand the true nature of combat." "I do," Sasuke replied, his breathing controlled despite the exertion. "Which is why I respect you enough to offer you a choice. Surrender, and you and your soldiers live. Resist further, and you will die. Those are the only options available to you now." Pirogue lowered his weapon. "The Dominion does not accept surrender." "Then you're fighting for masters who don't deserve your loyalty," Sasuke said. "But that's a realization every warrior must come to on their own." Captain Pirogue was beamed back to the Dominion fleet as a prisoner of war. But before he left, he spoke once more with Sasuke, his voice carrying the weight of military philosophy. "In another life, warrior, we might have been allies. The Dominion respects strength. Perhaps you will carry that lesson to your Federation." In Ops, Sisko watched the tactical display as the Dominion fleet began their withdrawal. The boarding party had failed. Their assault was no longer viable. And with a warrior of Sasuke's caliber defending the station, the cost of continued engagement became unacceptable by Dominion calculus. "They're breaking off," Dax reported. "All remaining warships are moving to withdraw position." Kira's fighter squadrons harassed the retreating vessels, but the Dominion commander made no move to counter. They had come for Sasuke Uchiha, failed to acquire him, and now faced a military situation where continued engagement would result in unacceptable losses. Sisko turned to where Sasuke had returned to ops, his uniform torn and bloodied from the boarding party engagement, his Sharingan still active and burning with intensity. The Uchiha warrior stood motionless, watching the enemy fleet disappear into warp space. "You saved this station a second time," Sisko said. "I defended my position," Sasuke corrected. "The distinction matters." But there was something different in his tone now. Less cold certainty, more acknowledgement of something deeper. The realization that defending a place, defending people, had become something more than a strategic calculation. As the alarms powered down and the station's damage control teams began repair operations, Sisko made a decision that would fundamentally alter Deep Space Nine's relationship with its newest resident. "Welcome to the crew, Sasuke Uchiha," he said. "I believe we have much to discuss about your future." The Romulan vessel decloaked precisely at the coordinates Deep Space Nine's subspace buoys had marked as neutral space. It was a warbird, sleek, predatory, the kind of ship that represented centuries of Romulan strategic thinking and military superiority. But it was alone, and that detail mattered immensely. A single warbird requesting diplomatic audience meant something other than invasion was being proposed. Captain Sisko watched the tactical display with cautious interest. "Hail them," he commanded. The view screen flickered, and a face appeared that Sisko had learned to recognize with increasing frequency over the past 3 years, Tal Shir operative Koval, his cold features and calculating demeanor marking him as one of the Romulan Star Empire's most dangerous intelligence officers. Behind him, the bridge of his warbird was visible, a command center designed for subtlety and psychological warfare rather than frontal assault. "Captain Sisko," Koval began, his Federation standard impeccable. "I trust Deep Space Nine's recent engagement with Dominion forces concluded favorably for you." "The Dominion withdrew," Sisko replied carefully. "I assume you have something to discuss, or you wouldn't have risked coming this close to the wormhole." "Indeed," Koval said. "My government has become aware of an extraordinary development on your station. A warrior from an alternate reality, possessing capabilities that exceed our current taxonomies of known species. A being of considerable strategic value." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. "We would like to discuss acquiring his services." From where he stood in the corner of ops, Sasuke's Sharingan activated. His perception immediately began analyzing Koval's physiology, his micro-expressions, the subtle tells that revealed intention beneath diplomatic language. What he found was fascinating, a mind operating at multiple levels of deception simultaneously, a consciousness trained to think 17 moves ahead in the game of interstellar political chess. "Acquire how?" Sisko asked, his tone remaining neutral. "The Romulan Star Empire has resources that would benefit your guest," Koval explained. "Technology, knowledge, opportunity. We would provide him with a level of autonomy and strategic freedom that Starfleet's rigid protocols could never offer. In exchange, we would request that he occasionally provide his perspective on matters of mutual interest." "You want him to work for the Tal Shir," Sisko said bluntly. "I want him to work with the Tal Shir," Koval corrected smoothly. "There is a distinction. We respect power, Captain. We don't seek to constrain it with regulations and prime directives. We seek to use it wisely, strategically, for mutual benefit." Sisko glanced toward Sasuke, whose expression remained unreadable. "I think you should present your case directly to him. He makes his own decisions." Koval's expression shifted into something that might have been approval. "Excellent. A being worthy of consideration deserves to hear the proposal personally." The Romulan gestured. "May I send a shuttle with a negotiator?" "Unarmed, of course. We seek dialogue, not confrontation." Sisko made the authorization, and 30 minutes later, a Romulan shuttle docked with Deep Space Nine. The operative who emerged was female. Romulan physiology marked by the characteristic ridged forehead and sharp features, and her name, as she introduced herself, was Sub-Commander Tlek. Her demeanor carried the peculiar blend of military bearing and espionage training that the Tal Shir cultivated in their operatives. She requested a private meeting with Sasuke. Sisko granted it, with the understanding that security would monitor the conversation. In a secure conference room, Plek presented the Romulan proposition with the precision of someone who had conducted 1,000 such negotiations. The Federation operates under the assumption that power should be restrained, regulated. Limited by ethical frameworks, she began. But power, properly understood, is neither good nor evil. Power is simply capability. What matters is who wields it and toward what end. Sasuke listened intently, his Sharingan analyzing every detail of her presentation. The Romulan operative was intelligent, well-prepared, and operating from a strategic philosophy that had genuine merit. The Romulan Star Empire didn't constrain power. It cultivated it, refined it, used it with ruthless precision toward defined objectives. "What would you ask of me?" Sasuke asked. "Primarily, knowledge," Plek replied. "You come from a reality where power operates differently than in this universe. That perspective is valuable. We would want you to help us understand how to think beyond the constraints of our current scientific frameworks. Occasionally, we would ask for your tactical input on matters of strategic importance. In return, we would provide you with access to our most advanced research, our intelligence networks, our strategic resources." "And my autonomy?" Sasuke pressed. "Would be complete," Plek assured him. "We are not Starfleet, bound by regulations and bureaucratic oversight. You would be a partner in our endeavors, not a subordinate following orders. The Romulan philosophy respects individuals who possess capability and the will to use it." Sasuke's Rinnegan activated, the concentric circles appearing within his dark eyes as he extended his perception beyond normal sensory limits. The ability to perceive alternate realities, to glimpse possibilities and potentialities, flared for a moment. What he perceived was a divergence in his path, one direction leading toward Federation structures and collective purpose, another toward Romulan autonomy and strategic power. Both paths had merit. Both offered something valuable. "I will consider your proposal," Sasuke said finally. "But I require time to understand this universe more completely before committing to any faction." Plek inclined her head slightly. "That is acceptable. The Romulan Star Empire can afford to be patient when the prize is worthy." She stood to leave, then paused. "One more thing, Uchiha. The Dominion will not accept your existence as an uncontrolled variable. They will make additional attempts to acquire or eliminate you. Eventually, they will escalate beyond what Deep Space Nine's defenses can withstand. When that inevitability arrives, remember that the Romulan Star Empire has centuries of experience surviving Dominion aggression through cunning rather than conventional military superiority." After Plek departed, Sisko found Sasuke on the promenade, standing at the viewport overlooking the wormhole. The Uchiha warrior's expression was distant, contemplative, his Sharingan deactivated but his mind clearly processing the proposition the Romulans had offered. "They made you an interesting offer," Sisko said, not phrasing it as a question. "They offered me what I've always wanted," Sasuke replied. "Freedom. Autonomy. The ability to pursue power without constraints or regulations." He paused. "And therein lies the problem, Captain. When I was younger, that's exactly what I sought. Absolute autonomy. Complete independence. The freedom to pursue my goals without anyone's interference or guidance. And now?" Sisko prompted. "Now I understand that absolute autonomy is another form of imprisonment," Sasuke said quietly. "When you answer only to yourself, when you trust no one and depend on no one, you become isolated in ways that no external constraint could create. The Romulan offer is tempting. But it's the same temptation that nearly destroyed everything I valued before I arrived in this universe." Sisko stood beside him, both men silently contemplating the wormhole's magnificent structure. "The Federation has its own constraints," he said carefully. We do limit individual power through regulation and collective decision-making. Some would argue that's oppressive. Others would argue it's the only way civilization survives. I'm beginning to understand the difference between power and wisdom, Sasuke said. This universe has taught me that distinction in ways my previous reality could not. He turned to face Sisko. I will not join the Romulans. But I also cannot commit fully to Starfleet. I need to remain independent while working with your Federation. Can you accept that compromise? Sisko considered the proposition. It violated standard regulations. It created a status that didn't fit neatly into Starfleet's organizational structure. But Sasuke Uchiha was already a being who existed outside standard parameters. I can, Sisko said. Welcome to Deep Space Nine as a civilian operative. You'll work with us when our interests align, maintain your independence when they don't, and we'll both try to keep the paperwork to a minimum. Word of the Romulan contact spread through the station rapidly. Kira expressed concern about Sasuke's potential divided loyalties. Chief O'Brien simply stated that having a warrior of that caliber choose to work with the station was better than any alternative. And in the corridors of Deep Space Nine, a complex dynamic began to develop. Sasuke was no longer simply a refugee from another universe. He was becoming something more nuanced, a bridge between factions, an independent operator with the power to influence the Federation-Dominion conflict. But the intelligence networks of multiple governments were already tracking his movements, calculating how to leverage or contain the Uchiha warrior's presence. The Dominion intensified their operations in the region. The Klingons sent feelers, interested in whether this powerful warrior might consider their version of military partnership. And in the shadows, Section 31, Starfleet's clandestine intelligence division, began operations aimed at understanding and potentially controlling Sasuke's extraordinary capabilities. In his quarters that evening, Sasuke meditated once more. His chakra flowed through his pathways with perfect harmony now, completely recalibrated to this universe's subspace parameters. The hybrid energy system he'd developed was proving stable, sustainable, perhaps even superior to his original capabilities. But with power came responsibility. And with responsibility came the slow erosion of the absolute autonomy he'd once treasured. It was, he reflected, a worthy trade. The medical readings that Bashir brought to the briefing room 3 days later sent a chill through everyone present. He stood before the senior staff with a PADD that displayed neural scans, quantum field analysis, and biochemical profiles that told a troubling story. Sasuke's Rinnegan is destabilizing, Bashir announced without preamble. The eye itself is developing microscopic fractures in its cellular structure. At first, I thought it was a gradual degradation process, but the latest scans show the damage is accelerating exponentially. If the current trajectory continues, his Rinnegan will be completely non-functional within 10 days. What causes this? Dax asked, leaning forward with scientific intensity. The Rinnegan exists at a higher quantum frequency than the rest of his physiology, Bashir explained, pulling up holographic displays of the affected ocular structure. When his chakra was dampened, the Rinnegan suffered the most significant strain. Now that we've created the subspace anchor field stabilizing his chakra, the eye is attempting to recalibrate to match the new frequency parameters. But the cellular structure can't quite accommodate the shift. It's like trying to force a crystal to vibrate at a frequency it was never designed to handle. Can you repair it? Sisko asked. I can attempt to stabilize the recalibration process, potentially slow the degradation. But genuine repair? Bashir shook his head. That would require technology one simply don't have access to. The Rinnegan structure operates on principles that are partially biological and partially something else. Something that doesn't fit neatly into Federation medical understanding. In the corridor outside the briefing room, Odo found Sasuke waiting with the patience of a warrior accustomed to standing guard. The Uchiha's Sharingan was active, the three-tomo pattern visible even through his partially lidded eyes, but his expression suggested he was monitoring something beyond normal visual perception. "You heard," Sasuke said. It wasn't a question. Station's security network picked up the medical alert, Odo confirmed. "Your Rinnegan is failing. How much time do you actually have?" "Less than Bashir's optimistic projections suggest," Sasuke replied coldly. "I can feel the degradation. Each time I activate the Rinnegan, the damage accelerates. Within a week, perhaps less, the eye will be completely useless." He paused. "It represents approximately 40% of my total combat capability. Losing it will make me significantly less effective." "What will you do?" Odo asked. Sasuke's expression hardened. "What I've always done. Adapt. Evolve. Find new ways to achieve my objectives." But there was something beneath the bravado, a flicker of concern that suggested this threat touched something deeper than mere tactical capability loss. The conversation was interrupted by a red alert that sent both of them toward Ops. Another crisis had developed, this one coming from an unexpected direction. The Maquis cell had seized a Federation outpost in the demilitarized zone. Not violently, but with tactical precision and operational security that suggested professional military planning rather than resistance fighter desperation. The outpost's commander had called for assistance, and Sisko was assembling a response team. "It's led by someone called Chakotay," Kira explained, pulling up intelligence files. "Former Starfleet, indigenous Earth heritage, now leading a Maquis cell dedicated to defending colonists in the DMZ. He's not Dominion-aligned, but he's not exactly Federation-friendly either." "Why seize the outpost?" Dax wondered. "According to their message, they need Federation technology to counter Cardassian military advances in the region," Kira said. "They're making it a negotiation, not a takeover. But if we don't respond appropriately, they might escalate." Sisko made his decision. "I'm taking a small diplomatic team to the outpost." Took 4 hours. During that time, Sasuke isolated himself in the shuttle's cabin, his mind working through the philosophical implications of his deteriorating condition. The Rinnegan had been his greatest achievement, the ultimate manifestation of his power, the fulfillment of his family's legacy. Its loss represented not just tactical diminishment, but a fundamental alteration of his identity. When they arrived at the outpost, Chakotay was waiting. A man with weathered features and indigenous tattoos that marked his connection to Earth's ancient cultures. His eyes held the particular intensity of someone fighting for a cause he believed in, even if that cause placed him in opposition to his former organization. "Captain Sisko," Chakotay said, his greeting formal but not hostile. "I appreciate you coming personally rather than sending in a tactical team." "Your message suggested negotiation," Sisko replied. "I prefer talking when possible. But I need to understand what you actually want from this outpost." As Chakotay outlined the Maquis position, the Federation's perceived abandonment of colonists in the demilitarized zone, the Cardassian military's escalating aggression, the desperate need for advanced technology, Sasuke's Sharingan remained active, analyzing the man's physiology, his stress patterns, his emotional state. What he perceived was genuine conviction. Chakotay believed in his cause with the same absolute certainty that Sasuke had once held about his own pursuit of power. It was a recognition that created unexpected empathy. But the negotiation was interrupted by tactical alerts. Cardassian warships had detected the Federation presence and were moving to intercept. This wasn't a planned encounter, it was a dangerous coincidence that threatened to transform a diplomatic situation into an armed conflict. "We need to leave," Sisko said immediately. "Now." But Chakotay moved to the outpost's command center, his hands already inputting commands. "Not without taking the technology we came for. If we leave empty-handed, the Maquis loses credibility with the colonists we're trying to protect." "You'll be caught," Bashir protested. "The Cardassians will intercept you before you reach the border." "Then we fight," Chakotay replied simply. "We've fought before. We'll fight again. Sasuke watched this exchange with growing understanding. Here was a warrior. Not formally trained in the shinobi arts, but possessing the fundamental warrior's philosophy nonetheless, willing to sacrifice everything for a cause he believed in. It was admirable and foolish in equal measure. I will provide tactical support, Sasuke announced. Your fighters against Cardassian warships creates an unbalanced engagement. With my assistance, the mathematics shift. I can't ask you to do that, Chakotay said. It would place you in direct conflict with the Cardassian Union. That creates political complications for your status with Starfleet. Then don't ask, Sasuke replied. I'm offering. There's a distinction. He turned to Sisko. Captain, get your team back to the station. I will remain here and ensure the Maquis cell reaches safe territory. Sasuke, your Rinnegan, Bashir began. Will function adequately for what's needed, Sasuke interrupted. Every moment we debate is a moment the Cardassians move closer. Make your decision, Captain. Sisko's jaw tightened. Allowing Sasuke to engage in direct military action against a major Alpha Quadrant power created unprecedented complications. But leaving him behind to face Cardassian warships alone was equally unacceptable. We all go together, Sisko decided. Chakotay, you get your people and that technology. We get back to the shuttle. Sasuke, you come with us. Captain, Chakotay protested. That's not a suggestion, Sisko said firmly. The Federation doesn't abandon allies, even ones currently in disagreement with our policies. We leave together, or we don't leave at all. The escape was a controlled chaos of coordinated movement and tactical positioning. Sasuke's Sharingan allowed him to track the Cardassian warship's approach vectors while simultaneously monitoring the Maquis team's movements through the outpost's corridors. His Rinnegan activated despite the pain, jagged sensations of cellular degradation that made his vision blur momentarily, to perceive the Cardassian tactical dispositions and identify the optimal escape route. As they ran toward the shuttle, Cardassian disruptor fire began tearing through the outpost structure. Sasuke turned and released a controlled burst of Chidori energy that detonated the outpost's power conduits, creating a barrier of electromagnetic interference between the shuttle and the pursuing Cardassian security forces. It bought them 30 seconds. It was enough. The shuttle achieved warp velocity just as Cardassian weapons fire bracketed their trajectory. They were clear, but the diplomatic incident was complete. The Federation had just directly aided a Maquis operation, creating a precedent that would resonate through the region's politics. In the shuttle's cabin, Chakotay approached Sasuke. Why did you do that? You risked everything for people you don't even know. Because you were willing to die for your cause, Sasuke said simply. That's a form of power that transcends physical capability. It deserves respect. He paused, his Rinnegan still active despite the pain. And because I'm beginning to understand that isolation doesn't equal strength. Sometimes, the greatest power comes from commitment to something beyond yourself. But as the shuttle accelerated back toward Deep Space Nine, Sasuke felt his Rinnegan's degradation accelerating, the strain of overuse against a failing structure pushing the eye closer toward complete non-functionality. His vision in the affected eye was becoming increasingly blurred, the distinctive red and gold patterns of the Rinnegan dimming with each passing minute. By the time they reached the station, one simple truth had become undeniable: Sasuke Uchiha was losing the power that had defined him for his entire existence. And somehow, that loss felt less catastrophic than it would have before arriving in this universe. The question was whether that acceptance represented wisdom or merely the exhaustion of a warrior facing inevitable decline. The Klingon task force arrived at Deep Space Nine under the command of General Gowron, the Chancellor of the High Council himself. It was an unprecedented honor and an implicit threat. The Klingon didn't dispatch their supreme military leader for routine diplomatic visits. Sisko received Gowron in the conference room, with Sasuke deliberately absent from the initial greeting. The message was clear: this warrior answered to no one's summons but his own. Gowron was a figure of imposing presence. His crested head and intense eyes reflecting centuries of Klingon warrior culture distilled into a single individual. He spoke with the authority of a military commander who had never questioned his own decisions. "I have come regarding the Uchiha warrior," Gowron announced without preamble. "The Klingon Empire recognizes power when we perceive it. This warrior demonstrates combat capability that approaches our own best warriors. The High Council wishes to make him an offer." "An offer of what?" Sisko asked carefully. "Honorable combat," Gowron replied, as though the answer were self-evident. "One-on-one battle with our greatest warrior, Worf, who serves on your station. Victory would grant Sasuke Uchiha status within the Klingon Empire as a recognized warrior of the highest caliber. Defeat would, well, defeat in such a match would be honorable regardless of outcome. Both warriors would gain respect through the engagement." Sisko felt a surge of alarm. "With respect, General, Sasuke's physical condition is compromised. His primary ocular ability is failing. This isn't an appropriate time for." "That is precisely when the challenge is most meaningful," Gowron interrupted. "A warrior fighting at full strength defeats predictable enemies. A warrior fighting against degradation and limitation, that demonstrates true honor." He stood. "Bring him the challenge. Let him decide whether he possesses the courage to accept." Worf was in the security office when Odo informed him of Gowron. Proposition. The Klingon security chief's reaction was immediate and visceral, a mixture of professional concern and warrior's anticipation. "My honor demands that I accept any challenge from the Chancellor," Worf said, his deep voice carrying the weight of cultural obligation. "But I have observed this Uchiha warrior. His abilities exceed standard Klingon parameters. And if his ocular systems are truly failing." "That's the point," Odo said grimly. "Gowron sees it as an opportunity for you both to demonstrate honor through combat against adversity." Worf nodded slowly, understanding the cultural logic even as he questioned its wisdom. "Then I will prepare myself. Honor demands nothing less." When Sasuke received the challenge, his response was characteristically direct. He arrived in the holodeck where Worf was already waiting, his batleth, the signature curved blade of Klingon warriors, held with the ease of someone who had wielded it through decades of combat. "General Gowron has extended the honor of combat between us," Worf explained, his tone formal. "Victory or defeat, both warriors gain respect through the engagement. Will you accept?" Sasuke's Sharingan activated, the three tomos spinning as he analyzed Worf's physical condition. The Klingon was formidable. Genetically enhanced for combat, trained in multiple martial traditions, carrying the weight of his species' warrior culture in every movement. But his fighting style, while effective, operated within established parameters. "I accept," Sasuke said simply. "But understand, I fight to win. I don't spare opponents based on tradition or sentiment." "I would expect nothing less," Worf replied. "That is the warrior's way." The holodeck activated around them, creating a neutral arena with stone walls and minimal environmental obstacles. The engagement would be pure combat, no external factors, no technology beyond their bodies and weapons. They began slowly, each testing the other's capabilities. Worf's batleth was a formidable weapon. Its curved design allowed for devastating cutting and striking patterns that required years of training to execute properly. Sasuke's sword was longer, thinner, designed for precision rather than raw power. The weapons clashed, and the holodeck resonated with the impact. What emerged quickly was a fundamental difference in fighting philosophy. Worf fought with aggressive passion. Each strike delivered with maximum force, each defensive movement calculated to set up the next offensive. It was a warrior's approach grounded in honor and direct confrontation. Sasuke fought with surgical precision. His Sharingan tracked Worf's every micro-movement, predicting the Klingon's next action before Worf himself had fully committed to it. His strikes were minimalist, economical, designed to create openings rather than overwhelming force. The battle escalated. Worf's strength forced Sasuke to employ chakra enhancement to match the Klingon's physical power. But Worf's speed began to falter as Sasuke's superior tactical awareness allowed him to control the engagement's rhythm. The Uchiha warrior was winning, but it was becoming increasingly clear that victory would require him to press his physical advantage to a potentially lethal conclusion. Then Sasuke's Rinnegan flared with pain. A spike of cellular degradation that caused his vision to blur momentarily. It was a fraction of a second, barely noticeable to anyone without enhanced perception. But it was enough. Worf capitalized on that instant of vulnerability with the efficiency of a seasoned warrior. His bat'leth struck true, and Sasuke felt the blade's edge cut across his shoulder. Blood flowed, and the wound was genuine, not a holodeck simulation, but actual damage to his physical form. Sasuke's response was instantaneous. His Sharingan burned brighter, compensating for the Rinnegan's failing. His sword moved with lethal precision, and within 3 strikes, Worf's bat'leth was knocked from his hands. The Klingon stood defenseless, his chest exposed, Sasuke's blade positioned for a killing strike. Neither warrior moved. "Yield," Sasuke commanded. "No," Worf replied, his dark eyes meeting Sasuke's crimson gaze without fear. "If I am to fall, I fall to a warrior of honor. Strike." But Sasuke lowered his sword. "You demonstrated more than physical capability, Worf. You demonstrated the willingness to die for your principles. That's the truest form of strength." He deactivated his Sharingan. "I will not kill an opponent who fought with honor. That would dishonor us both." Worf's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something approaching respect. He extended his hand, and Sasuke gripped his forearm in the Klingon gesture of mutual regard. "You are a true warrior," Worf said simply. "I am honored to have faced you." When Gowron learned of the match's outcome, his response was unexpected. Rather than disappointment that no clear victor had emerged, he seemed genuinely pleased. "This is how true honor operates," he declared. Two warriors recognizing each other's strength and choosing respect over the final killing blow. The High Council will acknowledge Sasuke Uchiha as a warrior worthy of Klingon respect. Should he ever wish to join our ranks, he would be welcomed as a full member of the Empire. But the battle with Worf had accelerated Sasuke's Rinnegan's degradation to critical levels. The holodeck combat, the strain of maintaining enhanced perception, the cellular stress from overuse, all combined to push the eye past the point of recovery. By the time Bashir ran his post-engagement scans, the medical reality was undeniable. "It's gone," Bashir said quietly, looking at the neural scans. "The Rinnegan has completely destabilized. The cellular structure has fractured beyond any repair methodology I possess. Your right eye is now completely non-functional." The Klingon stood defenseless, his chest exposed, Sasuke's blade positioned for a killing strike. Neither warrior moved. "Yield," Sasuke commanded. "No," Worf replied, his dark eyes meeting Sasuke's crimson gaze without fear. "If I am to fall, I fall to a warrior of honor. Strike." But Sasuke lowered his sword. "You demonstrated more than physical capability, Worf. You demonstrated the willingness to die for your principles. That's the truest form of strength." He deactivated his Sharingan. "I will not kill an opponent who fought with honor. That would dishonor us both." Worf's expression shifted, not quite a smile, but something approaching respect. He extended his hand, and Sasuke gripped his forearm in the Klingon gesture of mutual regard. "You are a true warrior," Worf said simply. "I am honored to have faced you." When Gowron learned of the match's outcome, his response was unexpected. Rather than disappointment that no clear victor had emerged, he seemed genuinely pleased. "This is how true honor operates," he declared. Two warriors recognizing each other's strength and choosing respect over the final killing blow. The High Council will acknowledge Sasuke Uchiha as a warrior worthy of Klingon respect. Should he ever wish to join our ranks, he would be welcomed as a full member of the Empire. But the battle with Worf had accelerated Sasuke's Rinnegan's degradation to critical levels. The holodeck combat, the strain of maintaining enhanced perception, the cellular stress from overuse, all combined to push the eye past the point of recovery. By the time Bashir ran his post-engagement scans, the medical reality was undeniable. "It's gone," Bashir said quietly, looking at the neural scans. "The Rinnegan has completely destabilized. The cellular structure has fractured beyond any repair methodology I possess. Your right eye is now completely non-functional." Sasuke sat motionless as Bashir explained the implications. The loss of the Rinnegan represented approximately 40% of his total combat capability. His tactical perception would be diminished. His ability to sense chakra signatures, one of his most valued abilities, would be severely compromised. His understanding of dimensional mechanics would be reduced to theoretical knowledge rather than experiential perception. He was, fundamentally, no longer the same warrior he had been when he arrived in this universe. "The Sharingan in your left eye remains functional?" Bashir asked. "Yes," Sasuke confirmed. "But the loss of binocular vision reduces my tactical awareness and depth perception. I will adapt, but the adjustment period will be significant." That evening, Sasuke stood in his quarters, looking at his reflection in the viewport's transparent aluminum. His right eye, the Rinnegan, was visibly darker now, its distinctive pattern faded into something resembling normal iris coloration. The power that had been contained within it was simply gone, dispersed into whatever quantum field governed this universe's energy dynamics. A chime at his door announced a visitor. Dax entered, carrying a PADD filled with historical records. "I've been researching your situation," she said without preamble. "My Starfleet history includes 3 centuries of combat engagements, medical histories, and strategic evolution. I wanted to show you something." She pulled up holographic displays. Every warrior, every culture, every being that faces power loss experiences the same psychological crisis. The question isn't whether you can adapt to reduced capability. The question is whether you can find meaning in existence beyond the pursuit of power. "That's a philosophical luxury," Sasuke replied coldly. "When power is all that stands between you and irrelevance, philosophy becomes a secondary concern." "Is it?" Dax pressed. "You've been on this station for 14 days. In that time, you've made choices that had nothing to do with personal power advancement. You defended the station against the Dominion. You aided the Maquis when you had no strategic reason to do so. You chose respect over victory against Worf. Those weren't decisions made by someone whose entire existence revolves around power acquisition." Sasuke turned away from the viewport. "Perhaps I'm simply learning to mask my true motivations behind humanitarian gestures. Or perhaps," Dax countered, "you're actually changing. Learning that connection means more than isolation. That purpose transcends personal capability. That the greatest strength comes from commitment to something beyond yourself." After Dax left, Sasuke returned to his meditation position. His chakra flowed through his pathways, adapting to the loss of the Rinnegan, recalibrating his entire energy system to function with one eye instead of 2. The process was painful, both physically and psychologically. But as his meditation deepened, Sasuke began to understand something he'd resisted acknowledging since arriving in this universe. Losing power might actually be the greatest gift this reality could offer. Because it forced him to discover what remained when power was stripped away. And what remained was something he'd spent his entire previous existence trying to destroy. It was the capacity for genuine connection. For loyalty that wasn't rooted in mutual power pursuit. For commitment to causes beyond personal advancement. In losing his greatest strength, Sasuke Uchiha was discovering a different kind of power entirely. The subspace anomaly appeared without warning on Deep Space Nine's long-range sensors, a massive rupture in the fabric of spacetime that matched the characteristics of the dimensional rift that had originally brought Sasuke to this universe. Chief O'Brien's analysis was stark. The anomaly was expanding, and its growth trajectory suggested it would reach the station's vicinity within 18 hours. "It's not natural," O'Brien explained in the emergency briefing, his engineering expertise lending weight to his assessment. "There's an artificial signature embedded in the subspace distortion. Someone or something is deliberately creating this rupture. And based on the energy patterns, I'd estimate it's being generated from the Gamma Quadrant." Sisko's expression hardened. "The Dominion? Has to be," Dax confirmed. "They've been developing subspace manipulation technology for years. This is their attempt to create a controlled rift, probably intending to extract Sasuke before the anomaly reaches critical instability. If the rift reaches critical mass near the station, what happens?" Sisko asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Subspace collapse," Bashir said quietly. "The entire region would be pulled into a dimensional void. Deep Space Nine, everyone aboard, the wormhole, everything would cease to exist in this reality." The mathematics were brutal. 18 hours to prevent a catastrophe that would kill everyone on the station and potentially destabilize the entire sector. Sasuke understood the stakes immediately when Sisko briefed him on the situation. "They're going to force my return," Sasuke said, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "If I don't voluntarily cross through the anomaly, they'll allow it to reach critical mass anyway. That way, they eliminate a variable they can't control while simultaneously creating a subspace disaster that destabilizes Federation operations in this region." "That's the assessment," Sisko confirmed. "Which means we need to seal that anomaly before it reaches critical mass. And we need to do it before the Dominion can attempt to extract you." "I can close it," Sasuke said quietly. Everyone in the briefing room turned toward him. Bashir was the first to voice what they were all thinking: "Your chakra reserves are already depleted from the Rinnegan's degradation. Sealing a dimensional rift of that magnitude would require channeling power at levels that could cause permanent neurological damage or complete chakra burnout." "I'm aware," Sasuke replied. "But I'm also the only being on this station capable of interfacing with the anomaly's dimensional properties. My chakra exists partially across multiple quantum states simultaneously. That makes me capable of perceiving and manipulating the rift in ways your technology cannot." "There has to be another option," Kira protested. "Some way to use Federation technology, or coordinate with." "There is no other option," Sasuke interrupted. "The anomaly responds to subspace manipulation. Your technology operates on different principles. I can bridge the gap between this universe's physics and the dimensional forces creating the rift. No one else can." Sisko made the only decision a captain could make in such circumstances. "Then we prepare you for the attempt. Bashir, I want you monitoring his vital signs continuously. Chief O'Brien, coordinate with Sasuke to develop a sealing protocol. Everyone else, begin evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. If this goes wrong, we need to minimize casualties." Over the next 12 hours, Sasuke worked with Chief O'Brien to develop a theoretical framework for closing the dimensional rift. The process required translating chakra manipulation into subspace mechanics. A bridge between two completely different systems of energy manipulation. What emerged was a protocol that was simultaneously elegant and catastrophically risky. Sasuke would need to project his chakra through the station's modified subspace generators, extending his consciousness into the dimensional rift itself. Once inside the anomaly, he would attempt to create a harmonic resonance pattern that would destabilize the Dominion's artificial structure and collapse the rift from the inside. The problem was that the process would completely exhaust his chakra reserves. Bashir's medical analysis was unambiguous. Attempting this protocol meant accepting permanent damage to his energy systems, possible neurological degradation, and at minimum, a recovery period measured in weeks or months. In his quarters, the night before the attempt, Sasuke meditated one final time with his Sharingan fully active. The three-tomo pattern spun lazily, processing sensory information at superhuman speeds. But beneath the tactical analysis, something else was occurring. A reflection on his journey through this universe, on the choices he'd made, on the person he'd become in 14 days. He thought of Worf, the Klingon who had recognized his honor despite their combat opposition. He thought of Chakotay, the Maquis warrior willing to die for his people. He thought of Dax, whose wisdom had forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about power and purpose. He thought of Sisko, who had offered him a place on the station without requiring him to surrender his autonomy. These connections, these genuine relationships, represented something his previous existence had systematically destroyed. In his original universe, Sasuke had cultivated isolation as a weapon, had eliminated bonds as potential weaknesses. Here, in this Federation starship and this war-torn region of space, he was discovering that those bonds were actually sources of strength rather than vulnerability. It was a revelation that made the prospect of surrendering his remaining power seem almost acceptable. When Sasuke took his position in the modified engineering bay, surrounded by the station's most advanced subspace equipment, the weight of what he was about to attempt settled across his consciousness like gravity. Around him, Chief O'Brien, Bashir, Dax, and Sisko watched from the control center, monitoring every aspect of his physiology. "Ready?" Sisko asked through the comm. "No," Sasuke replied. "But that's irrelevant. Begin the protocol." The subspace generators activated, creating a field that extended Sasuke's consciousness outward, accelerating his perception beyond normal sensory limits. His chakra flowed through the enhanced pathways, mixing with Federation technology in ways that created unprecedented energy densities. Then he was inside the anomaly. The sensation was indescribable, existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions, perceiving reality from angles that human consciousness wasn't designed to process. Sasuke's Sharingan, even diminished by the loss of his Rinnegan, allowed him to maintain coherence despite the overwhelming stimulus. The dimensional rift was structured, artificial, maintained through continuous energy input from a Dominion installation somewhere in the Gamma Quadrant. Sasuke could perceive the underlying mechanics, the way subspace frequencies were being forced into unstable patterns, the way the rift was expanding moment by moment as the Dominion poured more power into the destabilization. He began channeling his chakra in a counter pattern, attempting to create harmonic interference with the Dominion's artificial structure. It was like trying to create a perfect acoustic cancellation by singing against a roaring fire, theoretically possible, practically nearly impossible. But Sasuke's training, his discipline, his absolute commitment to achieving his objectives, these became his greatest assets. He refined the pattern repeatedly, adjusting microvariations in frequency, creating increasingly precise resonance waves that began to disrupt the rift's artificial scaffolding. "His vital signs are destabilizing." Bashir's voice came through the chaos of the engineering bay. Chakra output exceeding safe parameters by 40%. "Hold position," Sisko commanded. "Sasuke, if you need to abort, do it now." But Sasuke was past the point of abort. His entire consciousness was focused on the one objective, collapsing the dimensional rift before it could reach critical mass. He was burning through his chakra reserves at a rate that guaranteed permanent damage, but the alternative, allowing the station and everyone aboard to be destroyed, was unacceptable. The harmonic pattern crystallized, became perfect, achieved the resonant state Sasuke had been working toward. The Dominion's artificial structure, the underlying scaffolding maintaining the dimensional rift, began to collapse. For a moment, Sasuke experienced something transcendent. His consciousness, distributed across multiple dimensions simultaneously, perceived the moment of transition as the rift began to seal. He could see the Dominion installation in the Gamma Quadrant, see the Founders' facility that had been maintaining the subspace manipulation, understand the scale of their attempt to retrieve him or eliminate him. Then the dimensional rift collapsed completely, sealing with a harmonic frequency that reverberated through subspace itself. Sasuke collapsed in the engineering bay, his body going completely limp. Bashir was on him immediately, medical scanner active, his expression transforming from professional focus to genuine alarm. His chakra is completely depleted, Bashir reported. Total neurological burnout. He's still alive, but his energy systems have shut down completely. It's like his entire consciousness is in stasis. They transferred Sasuke to the infirmary and placed him in a stasis chamber. A sophisticated medical device that suspended his biological processes while allowing his systems to recover without further degradation. The prognosis was uncertain. Bashir estimated it could take weeks, possibly months, for Sasuke's chakra to regenerate to functional levels. And there was genuine risk that the damage was permanent, that he might never fully recover. But Deep Space Nine was safe. The dimensional rift was sealed. The Dominion's gambit had failed. In the briefing room, Sisko received reports from across the region. The Dominion had withdrawn their forces, recognizing that the subspace anomaly's collapse had disrupted their plans. Klingon vessels sent word that they recognized Sasuke's sacrifice as an act of supreme honor, the warrior who had given everything to protect a station and people who were not his own. Even the Romulans sent a message of grudging respect, acknowledging that they had misjudged the Uchiha warrior's commitment to principles beyond self-interest. Worf came to Bashir in the infirmary. Will he recover? I don't know, Bashir admitted. The damage is extensive. His chakra systems have essentially been completely depleted. Recovery is theoretically possible, but I've never encountered anything quite like this. Worf stood silently, looking at the motionless figure suspended in the stasis field. He fought his greatest battle not with weapons, but with choice, Worf said quietly. That is the truest form of warrior honor. The Klingon Empire will remember this. In the stasis chamber, Sasuke Uchiha existed in a state beyond consciousness. A void where thought itself had become impossible. His chakra, burned to its absolute limits, was beginning the slow process of regeneration. But whether that regeneration would restore him to functional capacity, or whether he would remain suspended in this twilight state forever, remained an open question. What was certain was that the lonely warrior who had arrived in this universe 14 days earlier had been fundamentally transformed. The question now was whether he would survive long enough to discover who he had become. 37 days passed before Sasuke's eyes opened. The infirmary's soft lighting was almost painful after weeks of sensory deprivation. His consciousness reassembled itself slowly, piece by piece, memories and awareness flowing back like water filling a container. He could feel his body, weak, depleted, but fundamentally intact. More importantly, he could feel his chakra. It was diminished, operating at perhaps 40% of his original capacity, but it was present. It was functional. It was alive. Bashir was there within seconds of the biometric alert. The doctor's expression cycled through relief, professional assessment, and genuine joy. Welcome back, Bashir said, running his medical scanner across Sasuke's form. You gave us quite a scare. We weren't certain you'd ever wake up. How long? Sasuke's voice was hoarse, amused. 37 days. You've been in stasis the entire time, allowing your chakra systems to recover from the dimensional rift sealing. Bashir paused. The damage was extensive. Your chakra output is currently at approximately 40% of baseline. I don't know if that will improve further. Your physiology may have found a new equilibrium at that level. Sasuke absorbed this information with the characteristic stoicism of a warrior accepting harsh reality. He had entered this universe at 85% capacity due to subspace incompatibility. He was now at 40% due to voluntary expenditure. The trajectory was clear, he would never return to the absolute power he had once possessed. And the anomaly? He asked. Sealed, Bashir confirmed. Complete dimensional rift closure. The Federation's subspace monitoring networks haven't detected even residual instability. You succeeded, Sasuke. You saved the station, the wormhole, possibly the entire sector. Over the next week, as Sasuke underwent physical rehabilitation to restore muscle function and neurological coordination, he received visitors who painted a picture of how his sacrifice had reverberated through the region's political and military landscape. Worf came first, bringing news that the Klingon High Council had formally recognized Sasuke as a warrior of legendary status. Your name is spoken in the Great Hall, Worf said solemnly. You demonstrated honor beyond the Klingon code. You are welcome in our empire, should you ever wish to join our ranks. Colonel Kira arrived with Sisko, both offering station security's gratitude and informing Sasuke that his quarters had been maintained exactly as he'd left them. You're part of this crew now, Kira said simply. That doesn't change just because you were in a stasis chamber for 5 weeks. Chakotay sent a message through subspace channels, the Maquis operative acknowledging the warrior who had aided his cell, recognizing the sacrifice that had protected civilians throughout the region. You've taught us that honor transcends organizational affiliation, Chakotay's recorded message stated. The colonists we protect know your name. They pray for your recovery. Even Dax came, bringing historical context. I've reviewed 300 years of Starfleet records, she said, settling into the chair beside Sasuke's medical bed. I've found only a handful of instances where individuals have voluntarily sacrificed their fundamental capabilities to protect others. Each of those individuals went on to discover that loss of power could create space for other kinds of growth. I suspect you're about to have that same experience. But it was Sisko's visit that carried the most weight. The captain came alone, carrying a PADD with official documentation. I'm offering you a position, Sisko said without preamble. Not as a prisoner, not as a guest, not even as a civilian operative. As a member of Deep Space Nine's command staff. You'd have the rank of commander, overseeing tactical operations and strategic coordination with Allied forces. You'd work directly with me on matters requiring your particular perspective. He paused. You'd also have access to all Federation resources dedicated to understanding your physiology and potentially restoring your chakra capacity to higher levels. But that research would be entirely voluntary. Sasuke considered the proposition carefully. A formal position within Starfleet. Commitment to the Federation's principles and protocols. The responsibility of commanding personnel and making decisions that affected not just his own survival, but the survival of others. It was the antithesis of the absolute autonomy he had once sought. And somehow, that made it feel right. I accept, Sasuke said. But with conditions. Name them, Sisko replied. My autonomy remains protected. If I determine that Federation interests conflict with my principles, I maintain the right to act independently. Second, I require continued contact with the Klingon Empire and the Maquis. My commitment to you does not preclude relationships with other factions. Sasuke paused. Third, I want access to Federation records regarding dimensional physics. If my original universe still exists, I want to understand the possibility of return. Sisko nodded slowly. Those are acceptable conditions. You're a being who exists between worlds, Sasuke. We shouldn't constrain you to operate within a single framework. Work with us when our interests align. Maintain your other relationships. And pursue your research into dimensional mechanics. Perhaps understanding how you arrived here will provide insights into other anomalies the Federation encounters. Over the following weeks, as Sasuke's physical strength returned, he began his new role at Deep Space Nine. The station's tactical operations required careful coordination with Starfleet Regional Command, Allied forces, and increasingly, independent operatives like the Maquis. Sasuke's strategic perspective, informed by his training as a shinobi, his experience commanding ninja teams, His understanding of how individuals with exceptional capabilities could be integrated into larger military structures proved invaluable. But more surprising to everyone was how Sasuke began transforming the station's culture. His presence, his demonstrated respect for warriors of all backgrounds, his willingness to recognize honor across factional boundaries, created a precedent that influenced how Deep Space Nine personnel interacted with both allies and adversaries. In the science labs, he worked with Bashir and Dax on understanding the nature of chakra itself. The research revealed that his energy system, while fundamentally alien to Federation science, operated according to principles that could be measured, analyzed, and gradually understood. There remained the possibility, remote but genuine, that his chakra reserves could be restored through carefully calibrated medical interventions combined with meditation and physical training. But Sasuke no longer pursued this possibility with the desperation of someone clinging to lost power. Instead, he approached it with the patience of a warrior, understanding that strength took many forms and that perhaps, the version of himself existing now, diminished in raw power but expanded in wisdom and connection, was actually closer to the person he needed to become. 3 months after awakening from the stasis chamber, Sasuke stood on the promenade at the viewport overlooking the wormhole. His Sharingan was dormant now, his left eye appearing normal except to those who understood what it meant. His body was lean, muscular, bearing the scars of his journey through this universe, the wound from the Jem'Hadar disruptor, the marks from his combat with Worf, the subtle neural scars from his chakra depletion during the dimensional rift sealing. But he was alive. He was functional. And for the first time in his existence, he was genuinely content with who he was rather than consumed by the pursuit of who he might become. Dax found him there, as she often did during his evening reflections. "Are you still thinking about your original universe?" she asked. "Less frequently," Sasuke admitted. "I came to this reality through accident, through forces I didn't understand or control. Part of me still seeks the knowledge that would allow me to return. But another part, the part that's been growing since I arrived here, understands that return may not be desirable. My original universe created someone driven by isolation and obsession with power. This universe has created someone different. Someone better." Dax suggested gently. "Someone more complete," Sasuke corrected. "I still possess my warrior nature. I still seek strength and understanding. But now those pursuits are balanced by commitment to others, by recognition that isolation is weakness rather than strength, by understanding that the greatest power often comes not from dominance but from connection." He paused, his gaze following the wormhole's magnificent structure. "I was alone in my original universe. Even when surrounded by people, I was fundamentally isolated. Here, on this station, in this universe, I discovered something I had spent years actively destroying in my previous existence. Community. Purpose beyond personal advancement. The capacity to fight for causes larger than myself. Will you ever try to return?" Dax asked. "If the opportunity presents itself, perhaps," Sasuke said thoughtfully. "But I would return as a changed person. And I suspect that version of my universe, the one that created the isolated, power-obsessed warrior I was, would not recognize or welcome the person I've become here." Over the following months, Sasuke's position at Deep Space Nine solidified. He became known throughout the region as the commander who understood both the Federation's principles and the pragmatic realities of survival during wartime. His tactical input proved decisive in several engagements against Dominion forces. His willingness to work with independent operatives created unexpected alliances that strengthened the Federation's position without requiring formal political alignment. But more significantly, he became a symbol of transformation. A being from another reality who had arrived diminished by incompatibility with this universe's fundamental laws, had lost the greatest sources of power he possessed, and had emerged stronger not through the restoration of that power, but through the development of wisdom, discipline, and genuine connection to others. The lonely warrior from another dimension had become something more valuable to the Federation than any weapon or tactical advantage. An example that power wasn't the ultimate form of strength, that sacrifice for others carried more weight than personal advancement, and that sometimes, the greatest victories came not from domination but from the choice to stand alongside others in common purpose. As Deep Space Nine's sensors detected new anomalies in subspace, as reports came of Dominion movements requiring strategic response, as Starfleet received intelligence from across the region, Sasuke Uchiha stood at the center of it all, not as an isolated warrior operating according to personal code, but as a commander, a strategist, a teammate, a friend. The dimensional rift that had brought him to this universe had closed permanently. But the doors it had opened to connection, to purpose, to transformation, would remain open for the rest of his existence in this reality, guiding him toward a future he could never have imagined in the isolation of his original world. Conclusion. The Federation archives would eventually record Sasuke Uchiha's arrival and integration into Starfleet operations as one of the most significant first contact scenarios in the organization's history. Not because of the threat he represented, but because of what his presence ultimately taught the Federation about the nature of power, sacrifice, and transformation. 16 months after the dimensional rift sealing, Sasuke's chakra had recovered to approximately 60% of his original capacity, a plateau that Bashir believed might be the stable equilibrium of his physiology in this universe. But by that point, Sasuke no longer measured his existence in percentages of maximum power. Instead, he measured it in relationships forged, in battles fought for causes beyond himself, in the daily choice to remain connected to others rather than retreat into isolation. The Klingon Empire continued to recognize him as a legendary warrior. The Romulan Star Empire maintained subtle intelligence contacts, never entirely abandoning hope that he might be turned toward their interests. The Maquis saw him as proof that Federation officers could transcend bureaucratic constraints when circumstances demanded. And within Starfleet itself, his legend grew, the commander from another reality who had sacrificed everything to protect those he had just begun to know. But Sasuke himself would have offered a different narrative. He would have spoken not of legend or sacrifice, but of transformation. Of a warrior discovering that power without purpose was hollow, that strength without connection was ultimately weakness, that the greatest battles were often fought not against external enemies but against the isolation that came from believing you must face every challenge alone. In the end, Sasuke Uchiha did not conquer the Federation or reshape the Federation-Dominion conflict through raw capability. Instead, he conquered himself, the isolation, the obsession with absolute power, the belief that strength required the elimination of emotional bonds. And in that personal transformation, he became something more valuable to the Federation than any weapon. A living example that beings could change, that power could be relinquished, and that in doing so, something far greater could be discovered. The dimensional rift had deposited him in this universe as a refugee. He had remained as a warrior. But he left his mark as a teacher, silently demonstrating to everyone around him that the truest strength came not from dominance, but from the willingness to stand alongside others in common purpose. Live long and prosper. More stories await.